So we'll go ahead and introduce the panelists. We have Nicole Jackson, who is a native of Cleveland, Ohio. She received her bachelor's in science in environmental education from the Ohio State University in 2011. She currently works as a nature coach and environmental education consultant and is passionate about getting Black people connected to the wonders of the natural world. And she is a team co-chair for Black Birders Week. We have next Ade Ben Salahuddin, who started at Yale as a ecology and evolutionary biology major and is currently pursuing a degree in biology secondary education with a K-12 teaching certification at Southern Connecticut State University. Also runs a YouTube channel focusing on prehistoric life and highlighting the diversity of the ancient past and the people who research it. And then finally, Dara Miles Wilson is a naturalist and program coordinator at the Nature Center at a nature center in Bethesda, Maryland. Her work extends across science media via collaborative projects and special events on a global scale. And we'll hear much more about their bios and the work that they're all doing in the course of this conversation. But it's great to be with all three of you. I think we'll have a really rich discussion. So I'm not a birder myself, but I have heard this term spark bird, which is like the bird that, as I understand it, is the bird that really got you interested in birding or got an individual interested in birding. So I'd be curious, instead of like a formal introduction, maybe each of you would go around and share what your spark bird is, and then just a little bit about how you got into birding in general. So maybe we'll start with Nicole, and then we can go in the order I introduced us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Justin, for that introduction, and thank you for having us Uproot Project for this discussion for Black Birders Week. Again, the hashtag for today is Black Birders So Fly, and we're focused on creativity for today. So thank you so much for tuning in. My spark bird, I usually say to people, because I haven't seen all of the birds, I think there's like close to 10,000 species. I'm still learning. I always say a bird that I haven't seen before is my favorite, but one that really intrigued me when I got started with bird watching and learning a little bit more about ornithology was the gray catbird, just because of its plumage, its song, its call, and its rusty patch underneath its tail, which is something just really unique and I wasn't expecting to see when I experienced this bird. So, yeah.
Ade?
All right. Well, thank you again for having us, Justin. I'm glad to be on the panel. Honored to be on the panel amongst these other folks. So my spark bird, sort of the northern flicker, and I say sort of because it wasn't the bird that I first saw and then was like, ooh, let me go bird watching after this. It was more so like I'd always sort of known about various bird species through like just looking through field guides and stuff because I liked doing that sort of thing when I was a kid. But the birds I was seeing around me in my neighborhood were mostly like your typical city birds, so your house sparrows and your pigeons and starlings, etc. But because of the way New Haven is laid out, there's very rich sections and the not so rich sections, let's put it that way, and that comes with sort of different little ecological spaces. And so the ones that I was used to seeing were the city ones, but literally like a couple of blocks away from us, because again, New Haven is very small, but you see the disparities. I just happened to be in that other neighborhood at one point and I saw a dead northern flicker. And at that point I was like, this is a very exotic looking bird compared to what I'm used to. So that was, I think, the actual thing that made me start really thinking about those sorts of things. And this is when I was in like high school. But in terms of actually like starting bird watching itself, I wouldn't say there's like a single spark bird per se. It was more like a spark area. So yeah, I usually say northern flicker just because it turned that light on for me.
Very, very interesting. Okay, Dara?
Hi, excuse me. Hello, good afternoon, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening. My name is Dara Miles Wilson. I went to American University in Washington, D.C., and I began birding after that. But while I was attending university, I worked at the Smithsonian National Zoo in Washington, D.C., and I was in the Amazonia exhibit because at the time I was focusing on Latin America, so I wanted to maybe just that made sense for me. And while I was there was a bird. It's the blue-gray tanager. Maybe if you're in Florida, in some parts of Florida, like South Florida, you might get it. But typically we don't really see that bird. It's certainly not where I am. I found out about it because of a museum, a zoo, essentially. It was only until after I graduated college, and I moved someplace. I moved to the Republic of Panama, and I was working for Smithsonian again. I remember one day I was in my room and I heard a super familiar sound, and it was a blue-gray tanager. And mind you, like I called that my birding moment, because it was then when I could actually recall something, like I know that sound, and I look out and it was a mating pair. That was my spark moment, and I began really, really birding shortly after that.
Great. So I want to ask one more sort of intro question, which is just so we know a little bit about what drew you at first to birding. What has it meant to you? What is birding meant to? I mean, it's involved in all of your professional lives, but what has it meant to you professionally, personally? How has birding been? I guess we can go in that same order, starting with Nicole.
For me, it's definitely connection to freedom, curiosity, knowledge. Growing up in inner city Cleveland with 10 siblings, being raised by a single parent, like I didn't have a lot of downtime because I was doing a lot of babysitting. And if not babysitting, I was in school. So just learning about nature was something that was very therapeutic and healing for me, but also to be able to learn about the different places I could eventually think of going as I got older, and teaching other people about the connections that we have to nature as humans, and how those, relationships help us really bring everything together, which is going back to our theme this year, flying full circle. It's definitely a full circle moment for me of learning about birds, but also connecting it to how it's impacted my everyday life, how it's impacted my relationships with myself and my community, and how it's just helped me really grow within my knowledge of knowing about birds and their behavior, and how I could be more intentional with helping them as far as conservation purposes. And then just really going back to the freedom thinking in terms of knowing birds can, go anywhere, they have that freedom to fly, and the curiosity part of it, knowing that they have all of these different layers to them, their uniqueness and their adaptations is something I've always been intrigued by. So to be able to experience birding in so many different ways and on so many different levels keeps me motivated and engaged with the species.
Yeah, that's great. Ade?
Yeah, so what does birding mean to me? I think for me, the biggest sort of, I guess, revelation that birding's brought me personally would have to be just sort of the realization of how diverse, like even our sort of neighborhood areas are. Being a kid who always grew up watching Animal Planet, you come up with this thought of like, the creatures are out there. You got to go to like the jungles. You got to go to the savannah somewhere. And if you're not living out there already or somewhere nearby, it's like, it seems like you're never really going to see anything, but it's like, no. Like even the city birds I mentioned earlier, they're doing things. They have lives that are going on, and they're part of an ecology that exists, that you exist within directly, and sort of that interconnectedness and seeing what they are doing right here in front of you and in your backyards and everything like that. For me, being a very ecology minded person and thinking about how things are connected and how things have been connected through time, through evolution, how they've co-evolved together and all these relationships. It's just sort of provided me with like a really good sort of personal revelation. It's like, life exists everywhere, and you are part of that, regardless of where you are.
Dara?
Yes. I feel a little called out by Ade's response there, because my experience was pretty much that. Like, I'm in what seems like an exotic place. It's been called like the best place in the world to go birding. That's where I fell in love with birds. So that was my start, really. And then in the years since, really coming to understand and know that there are, like what Ade said, that there's stuff all around me, but I just need to seek that out. And I just need to, as Nicole also said, be curious. I've always been a curious person by nature. I come from a huge educational background. Both my parents are teachers. Both my older sisters are in education, and I'm in education myself. But understanding and knowing that like this has evolved for me, that initial experience, taking that initial experience, and then also hearing other people's stories and recognizing that you don't need to necessarily travel. You don't necessarily need to be in the Republic of Panama. I'm looking outside of my window right now and I'm looking at a bird. So just understanding and having that be a grounding point to connect me with others has been incredibly restorative for me as a person who's not a scientist. I didn't study biology. I did poli-sci, so I'm a social scientist. I really connect with humans, but still I connect with nature. And if I can find a way to bridge that, I'm constantly working on ways to try and bridge that, not just for myself, but for others. That's how it's grown for me.
Great. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think we'll probably spend a lot of time talking about how we can bridge that. And I think a great place to start is what brings us here today, the Black Birders Week. So maybe we could just talk a little bit about the origins of Black Birders Week. What was the vision, and then how have you seen it grow and evolve over time? We can start with Nicole again.
Yeah, so it's been 4 years, surprisingly. It doesn't feel like it, but yeah, we started in 2020, same time around Memorial Weekend, and before all of Black Birders Week kind of progressed, we were part of a group chat. So there was, Black science educators, Black birders, Black STEM folks in general. That came together as part of a group chat, and then this vision evolved. I was not a part of the conversation around Black Birders Week becoming a thing, but I do recall it being talked about as a day, and then it progressed into a week, and then pretty much I would say within 48 hours it was created online through social media platforms of Black AF and STEM. And yeah, we just hit the ground running with the planning and really just thinking about the incident connected to Christian Cooper and Central Park, as well as a lot of the police brutality that we were very familiar with. It just was pretty much amplified. And 2020 was a crazy year. It was an election year. A lot of murders of Black people and COVID. So there's so many layers of oppression happening that, things were just boiling over, and we just wanted to have a space to really talk about the issues and barriers that we were experiencing as Black people in these fields of STEM. So birding was a big part of that, and just looking for solace and safety amongst the Black community, but also outside, because a lot of people weren't able to go out and engage because of COVID, but also just that knowing that the isolation timeline was uncertain, we still needed to be able to have those connections through nature, through birds, and through the science community. So for us, it was literally like, let's just, find each other, get to know each other, and build a space where we can share our joy, our concerns, be able to speak out and feel safe, but also let other people know that we're working towards something better and greater for ourselves and for the rest of society. So it was an opportunity for us to really build something that, was needed. Even though it was really spontaneous, a lot of people were letting us know that and thanking us for creating that space, because it created so many other opportunities for other people to gather and come together and really think about the layers of microaggressions and racism and white supremacy in these academic spaces, but also science spaces, community spaces, and really think about, critically think about the issues that we still encounter as we go through life.
Great. Ade or Dara, anything to add to that?
Yeah, excuse me, I do on Ade, unless you would like to chime in. Okay, so I thank you, Nicole, for hopping in first on that, because Nicole was out of the three of us, was the only one present in what we call like the original cohort of Black Birders Week organizers. But yeah, I vividly remember 2020, not just COVID. I remember the stuff leading up to it. I remember the social nonsense, the political nonsense, the Christian Cooper's Karen video wasn't even the first Karen video that we had been seeing. It was a trend of these things happening. I will never forget that. I will never forget that summer watching from afar, literally, because myself, I was living through a situation very similar to Christian Cooper, but daily. So for me, seeing, I almost feel like I'm tearing up now, because like it was tough. And 2020, I remember like connecting with Nicole, immediately like going to see her, immediately like, and now here we are. But before then, I had not seen another Black person, another Black birder. I had never known that before. So the sheer power of that, and again, 48 hours, and this was all online, no in-person events like we have them now, but that year had reached so many people and affected so many people in such a way that I just feel a strong need to emphasize that it affected me, that I saw it, I was watching. Fast forward, I felt the need to like make sure others have such an experience, because like this really does matter. And I'm so grateful to your original group, and I'm so grateful to everybody who's organized since.
Ade, last thoughts, any other thoughts?
Yeah, just to sort of spin off of what everyone else has already said, as sort of, I guess, the newest person of the three of us, having been I was very loosely aware of like this Black Birders Week thing that was going on social media, but I wasn't even was not even on Twitter at the time. So I didn't even get on Twitter until roughly like early mid 2021. And I just happened to find the space that they were using to communicate with each other within that. And I think the biggest thing for me in terms of how it's grown has just been seeing all the other different science fields that have also done their own sort of spin-offs, essentially. And it's great to see like that first year. I can't even recount all the ones that I know right now. There's chemistry, there's botany, there's mammals, there's what else? What's some other ones? Natural history museums, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just like before that, I knew a handful of people. Like I knew there were Black people in natural sciences in general. But just the fact that everyone's suddenly become very consciously like visible and hyper visible and making efforts to make those connections with people. Suddenly I just knew, or not new, but I suddenly start seeing everybody in these fields. Whereas, beforehand, if you're interested in science in general, particularly if you're Black, it seems like your only real options are going into medicine or going into like engineering or maybe agriculture. And now I guess technology, like computer science, et cetera. And that's not to knock any of those things, but there doesn't seem like they never felt like there was really a space to do any of these other science fields, these sort of luxury science fields. I put luxury in quotation marks because they are very essential to everything that I mentioned before. Yeah, so to bring it sort of full circle for me, even though we're still at the start of this talk, I mentioned this before, but in a previous event, but yesterday I was able to bring on another Black paleontologist to talk about bird evolution. And I realized I have never seen in all the documentaries of nature, evolution, et cetera, I've never seen two Black scientists or Black people interested in science at least conversing with each other on any sort of public platform about science. And I was like, and specifically about paleontology or evolution. I'm just saying like, wow, I was my first one after almost over a quarter century of watching all these shows. It's like, yeah. So for me personally, that's the biggest impact Black Birders Week has had. Showing everybody that we are all in all the fields, literally and figuratively.
I want to pick up on that. I mean, just take a little bit of a beat to sort of name some of the problems here, some of the challenges here. And I know that could be a whole different webinar, but pick up on this question of narrative and the way in which scientists are depicted in media and sort of the public conversation. And I guess it's just to ask, like, is there a narrative problem? Is a big part of this problem that the media portrays birding, but also science as white? And then maybe, like, Black birders is a specific fix, but how do you think we should address that challenge? And we'll start with you, Ade, again, and we can go around.
Yeah, so definitely, just like I said, knowing that all these people do exist out here in these fields, certainly there's a media narrative aspect to it. And the sort of image that I always had, at least, of a scientist, like, you see on TV, these sort of generations old field researchers, they're the ones who, they're going into these tropical areas. They're not even featuring like the local people, the local scientists who know these animals intimately because they're from cultures who lived alongside them. It's sort of the parachute science of it. And so, someone from Western Europe or someone from the United States goes to some exotic location, and you're following their story as opposed to the story of the people that they're frankly consulting with to get a lot of the information they're getting. And so I think personally, that's a huge narrative issue that I've noticed and have always had a gripe with. But yeah, I don't want to speak too much because I'm sure the other folks have things to say, but I guess that's the leading thing for me, as far as actually, the narrative itself. There are other structural issues too, but narrative is definitely a big part of it. And that's the biggest one that comes to mind for me.
Dara, you've been nodding a lot. Do you have thoughts on this question?
I have many thoughts. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to clearly and concisely articulate those said thoughts. But Ade, that was a really, yes, there's definitely absolutely a narrative, and we know, or I believe a negative narrative and media about what a scientist looks like. Not negative, incorrect. Especially let's say maybe in a movie or something like that. I'm a little shocked. Like I'm trying to work out, but there is no way that all you scientists are this buff, this thin, this skinny. You know what I mean? This, like, you have no bags. So just even that, like on a very basic level of just like, is this accessible to me? Can I see, like, do you even look realistic? Is that alone really matters to adults, to children, especially to teens, to people who are trying to maybe mold themselves. I'm still molding myself. But I certainly know that if I saw a better narrative, if I had the narrative that, like, we are currently establishing about, hey, we're out here, we are in all the fields, like Ade just said, then I do definitely feel that I might have taken a slightly different path than what I currently do now. Not to say that I'm not thoroughly fulfilled, but just to say the possibilities of what could be done, because my imagination would allow me to go there. But if we don't allow our imagination to go there because the narrative is it's not set up to allow us to proliferate in that way, then so that's that.
Yeah, Nicole, I want you to come in on this, but just to add a little bit of one other question to it too, and we'll get others on this one too, is just, what about some of the structural challenges? I mean, even for Black people, if we're interested in nature and the outdoors and birding, maybe we don't have the same opportunities to get out there, or at least that seems to be one of the challenges. So maybe just talk a little bit about some of those structural challenges, and then if anything you want to as well on the narrative bit too.
Yeah, so I instantly think of self-care in these structural components of the narratives, and I feel like there's narratives from the Black community and there's narratives from the white community, and then a lot of things in between that I've experienced myself going into initially veterinary medicine and then environmental education, and even doing field research. There's layers in terms of what a researcher looks like, what a scientist looks like, what we're interested in even, people trying to define that for us versus really listening to our interests and the paths that we want to create for ourselves. So with that, I think in terms of even just having an interest in nature or birds or science, just because you want to know things versus it being connected to a job or, to make money, that we can't, because we're not selecting to be doctors, we can't have good lives. We can't have satisfying lives, and we can't be happy. So even that, I think about a lot more, especially since COVID and, thinking about the world of work, but also collecting data, the information that we need, to make better decisions for our communities, to make sure that they're healthier and that they have the resources and tools they need, as scientists and researchers. And I think for me, a big part of it is just having more of those conversations around safety and understanding that we have always had an interest. We just don't show it in the same way. Which is why I think Monday was hashtag was Black Birder Culture. So really talking about how the Black culture connects with nature in different ways and how we really amplify the purpose of our authentic selves showing up in these spaces, and why that's so important to highlight and amplify. And we still get a lot of we don't see color, but we need to be able to point out those unique things, to show that we're all special in different ways, and that it's not, one size fits all. So I think with the narrative conversation and with the structures, I feel like a lot of the issues that we still question and have concerns about are rooted in our history. Like, it's just become so repetitive, and I feel like a lot of the questions that we ask can be answered from our history, like what we've been showed time and time again of, what can go wrong versus what can go right if we really start to think about those layers more intentionally and with more care and understanding of, the human dimension, and that we're not these floating beings, that we have feelings, we have thoughts, we have concerns, but it's not out of anger, it's not out of frustration. And yes, we can have those feelings, but at the same time, we really want to get to a better place, altogether, versus it just being continuously being frustrated and having to vent, but working toward a better solution for everybody.
Justin, do you mind if I
Yeah, please
real
go.
quick? Because Nicole got those gears turning. Also, I realized I addressed the narration, but you definitely did ask about access and availability. And thank you, Nicole, for history. Historically speaking, it is my belief that the lack of access or the disparity between access to green spaces, urban green spaces, I think that's systemic. I think that's systemic racism. I truly, truly do believe so. And again, just as Nicole said, if you just look through the history, their reports essentially show that green spaces, they're more readily available, they're more bigger, greater, they're more available in essentially rich white neighborhoods. And I don't know what more I need to say other than that we as brown and Black people have been saying this a lot. We've been saying this for years. Our health, it's showing up in our health. Just like the proximity that we have to less than ideal living spaces. I'm not even green spaces, but just toxic spaces. Why do I have access to that, but I don't have access to a park? So when we frame it in that lens, then I challenge someone to really look through the history and see hey, we're looking at patterns here, and we're looking at patterns with people. So I just wanted to follow up with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because talking about Christian Cooper in 2020, and of course, for a lot of people, learning about, the disparities in air quality, which is related to access to green spaces, that all kind of came together at once for a lot of people. I want to, sort of pivot off of what we've been talking about, the history. I guess actually, Nicole, you were talking about the history, and a lot of the organizations that kind of have a sort of a big place in what we think about as environmental groups, conservation groups, etc., have their own racist histories. I'd be curious just, how you all think those histories are being addressed. Do you see real attempts to reckon with those histories? What do you think should be done about that? We gotta laugh. So you might have to start first, Dara.
No, it was just when you said, are we reckoning with those histories? I just had a laugh because of something that happened in the news recently with the national organization that upset me and upset a lot of others and disappointed me greatly. Very greatly disappointed me. And I'm referring to National Audubon Society, their leadership choosing, after a lot of talks, after a lot of public input, to not change their name. It feels, and you ask, like, does this feel genuine? That didn't feel genuine, because I remember in the year prior to when they made their decision, someone even reached out to me from NAS. Hey, we want to talk to you about this. We're trying to weigh our options. Like, that's a waste of time. And I do really feel like that's what all it was now, because there are certain ways where you can address changes, where you can just make even things more accurate. I just learned earlier today, this is about a bird that I'm in love with. I don't know its current name anymore because I knew it as a blue-crowned motmot, but they changed that. I'm not certain why exactly they changed it, but still, nonetheless, to come together to realize, oh, okay, let's redirect how we want to talk about this story. I want to see is so much more of that, but I'm not seeing enough of that. Only ones I'm really seeing do stuff like that, groups like us. I'd love to see that more.
Yeah, I would say, it's very frustrating and disappointing to, have such effort put into changing. In my mind, I'm like, change is constant. Like, why is that such a hard thing? But I also see it as, again, connecting. I always connect it back to history. So, like, why are people just like waking up with like memory loss of all of the things that have been happening historically? And if it's not being talked about now, it'll probably be brought up later, through generations and through more pretty much turmoil, that's happening in communities and kind of different categories. And I think about that in terms of just historically, like, we can't erase what's happened already. Like, let's acknowledging it, I think, like, for some reason that creates, a rift for people to acknowledge the pain that has been and the harm that's been caused to marginalized people, indigenous people, and you can't get away from it. Like, it's always going to show up somewhere. And I think that's the part that I'm frustrated, but like at this point I'm like, okay, I can only focus on the impact I have, and I can't worry about what they may or may not be doing, to help their cause or to help other people, because again, there's so many different threads I think of that are being pulled, and it's unraveling everything else. This big blanket that's being unraveled, and it's kind of shredding itself, because essentially when we're not acknowledging the full story of a person in their life, then we're creating more gaps that again will just resurface later. So for me, it's not even about, okay, this specific thing needs to happen and I'm fine, as far as the name change not happening, but acknowledging and letting people know, like, a lot of people don't know about Audubon fully. They just know, okay, this person who had this, academic connection, I guess, to birds and their growth and like species and conservation, but like also they were still human at the end of the day, and they made really bad decisions in terms of relationships with Black people, with enslaved people, and like, why can't we just acknowledge that and that be a part of that person's legacy, whether we like it or not? Like, like it's part of their story, it's part of their history. And yes, it can be complex. Yes, it can be uncomfortable, but we can't erase those facts. We can't erase that. So at least acknowledging it, or, and trying to sweep it under the rug is just making more people distance themselves from these organizations and from wanting to support them in doing more grassroots types of work, because they're showing that the dollar is more important, or the name or the idea of helping is greater than really understanding the complexities of our history. So as I feel like it's a broken record. Like, to me, I'm just like, there's just so many versions of this that have been happening. So it does not surprise me at all, but it's unfortunate because I feel like eventually it's going to become obsolete. And, these younger generations are showing that because they're speaking out against a lot of what is happening, because they see the unfairness, they see the disconnection, they see the lack of nurturing of communities and terms of tools and resources and engagement. So if anything, you can have all the money, but in terms of community and people, that can fade pretty quickly. And I feel like that's what they need to pretty much sustain themselves. So.
Yeah. Great call to reckon with the history. So just a reminder to folks in the audience, please submit any questions you have. We've got just about 15 minutes left, so would love to hear from some of you. I know it's zoomed by really quickly. But before we get to that, I want to ask a little bit about, beyond birding. I mean, we talked a bit about how birding, helps connect people with nature, which is of course important for so many reasons. I also wanted to just touch a little bit on how birding might help people get interested in STEM careers, and how it might prepare Black people for careers in the sciences, and maybe, like as Ade was saying, not just engineering, but like a sort of a broad swath of the sciences, including the natural sciences. So I'd love to hear some thoughts about that. And maybe we'll start with Ade, since you made that point earlier.
Yeah, sure. So I guess to address the question, I think the first point I should make is that a lot of the people who I remember seeing when Black Birders Week first popped off, like they're birders, but very few of them are actually like ornithologists. Not everyone, but a lot of people like Nicole, environmental educators, or like conservationists in general, or they work in a park space. Like a lot of the guests that have been featured over the past couple of years, like I think very few of them are actually ornithologists proper. And I think, they always had the lifelong interest in birds. So like, I think the fact that birds and bugs, because those two groups of animals at least, are like the most accessible to people. And obviously bugs have a more limited appeal, I'll say. So, that's sort of the birds, you're essentially left with birds as sort of the conduit into which you can go into other sciences. That's sort of the hook for a lot of folks. Because once you start hearing birds and seeing birds, oh, it's so pretty, it sounds so nice. They fly. I want to learn more about these sorts of things. And then that leads you into what sort of spaces do these birds need? What sort of foods do they need? What kind of environments or climates do they need? What, how do we protect that? And then you're just spreading out into, like I said before, the sort of the ecology vein that's in some way or another. And just realizing the interconnectedness of all this. And then, within that, you might find something else that piques your interest, and spin off of that in that way. So yeah, like personally, like I said, I'm not really, I'm a birder. I'll call myself that now. But it's only been about a year that I've actually done any sort of bird watching. Like I said, birds were just sort of a hook for me in this sort of most recent stage of my life into getting really back into pursuing natural sciences as a career.
That's great. Oh yeah, Dara, do you want to? Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I wanted to chime in just because I just finished an IG live maybe about an hour and a half ago with some college students, one recent graduate, one current student, and I asked something very similar because I know that neither of them have the desire to pursue an academic career in ornithology. And I love their answers. I'll give this one answer of my mentee from when I was living in Florida. She went to FAMU and she said she wanted to originally be an event planner. But somehow eventually that changed. I believe it was slightly before I met her. She decided to switch over to something environmental. But us birding together, that was the first time she had ever been birding, ever. And I was paired with her through a program to connect college kids to birds. And I love how like that's where she started. But like currently, she just graduated last year, but she currently works at Disney's Animal Kingdom doing that. And just hearing her talk about like how she now really appreciates like conservation education. Not just there's, of course, you have the idea of we need to protect these and like working in a profession that allows you to do biological monitoring, jazz like that. But this also counts as protection to me. This like having hordes of kids, hordes of people come through. What is that bird? Why does this matter? And her now being able to say like, oh, just speak the way she does on something that she just like you, Ade, she just started doing, speaks wonders to me about just the power of my communication with others and then how that will then grow so much. And that's really what we all need to be doing, connecting with others and letting that grow.
Yeah, Nicole, do you want to chime in there too?
Yeah, I just think of, and even doing this webinar, like we're just exposing the different ways that you can connect to nature and natural sciences and career types. I was not given this plethora of career paths when I was growing up. You just hear what everybody else says and what they think you should be doing. But in terms of even environmental education, I remember my major was parks, recreation, and tourism, and one of the careers was a concert promoter. So I didn't even think in terms of like the layers of ways that you can connect with community and park spaces and hosting events. Like there's so many ways that you can think of how to plug yourself into these types of careers that match your interests and your passion. So for me, again, going back to the flying full circle, a lot of what I was doing at the start of my college years, really thinking about, I want to be a veterinarian, I want to take care of animals, not realizing that I was just looking for things that help me heal from my trauma that I experienced when I was younger. So now I'm in a space where, I've done a lot of trial and error, which is great. I really encourage the trial and error versus just having something and sticking to it and realizing that you're miserable and you don't like it. Asking questions, but and also realizing that I liked everything. Like I was interested in science, I was interested in writing, I was interested in literature. So like what's something that can bring all of those things together and still have that nature focal point? And that was environmental education for me. And then amplifying it a little bit more, evolving it a little bit more. Now I do my nature coaching because I have all this knowledge and I want to share that and I want to impact other people in my community and help them heal. I've become a nature coach that focuses on nature therapy, using nature therapy to help Black women find more joy and healing in their life through nature experiences. So you never know where these, whether it's a talk, a discussion, a mentor, like where these discussions, opportunities are going to take you. And it really helps you think about really expanding the opportunities and not limiting yourself.
Yeah, Ade, do you want to close us out on this question?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on both of the prior points that were said, insofar as connecting and showing new avenues. Not to plug, but I've published a an interview with a friend of mine who was at the Yale School of Architecture, and this is through BirdNote, and we were talking about an assignment that she had to do. This never actually got constructed, to be clear, but it was a hypothetical project where they were supposed to be designing, I think, like an outdoor pavilion type of structure, and think about the birds in the neighborhood as well as the community that lives there. And in speaking to her after that, she was very reflective on like, yeah, this really actually changed how I think about how I design buildings. It makes me think about like new potential designs moving forward, like new materials to use, new ways to do things in general, and also incorporate that into her thinking of, how can I do this in a way that is reflective of my culture, her being from Kenya, so thinking another Black culture, and pushing those concepts in a new direction, or an exciting new direction, considering again, going back to the history and like sort of alternate histories, sort of these sort of Afrofuturist ideas of like, sort of what could have been. Like, we are in a very crucial position to have a lot of those what could have been and make them something, that is a reality now, because it's something that's called for more pressingly than ever at this point. So, again, this is just someone who's technically, I guess I don't know where architecture actually stands between sort of the art and the STEM fields. I feel like it straddles both of them perfectly. But point being, like, even in a field that's not very obviously natural sciences related, there are still a lot of lessons that can be learned and people are learning through that, and taking it forward. So yeah, I just wanted to comment on that, to bring that in.
Yeah, great. That's really sorry, this talk here. So we just have 5 minutes left. I would love to hear from anyone in the audience, but if not, I can close this out. I'd be curious to ask, just, you all are science communicators, and I think we probably have some in the audience who are also in the field. And I just wondered, like, what advice you would give to folks about how they can communicate some of the same things that you've been saying here, which is all really powerful. How do you get that out to an audience, to people who might be like, birding, like, what's that? Or, science education, what's that? Like, what are some like messages, learnings that you would give to people listening in?
Yeah, I can chime into this. I would say, just again, asking questions if you're curious. I know with a lot of the events that we're doing in person and virtually, always, in terms of learning more about what we're doing for Black Birders Week, or just with Black AF and STEM. In general, I would say definitely checking out our main hashtag, Black Birders Week, through our social media platforms. Hopefully there's more people popping up in different communities and regions to share more of their stories. That was a big part of what we did for the first year, was just share like our interests and how we got into birding or the STEM field, and like sharing ourselves versus, more of the academic layers and the perfection of how we're learning and what we're learning. But the realness of it. And, a lot of us aren't coming from, well-off households, and, we don't have a ton of community support or even mentors. And I think that's something we're continuously looking for. So really having the focus on building community and building relationships, and lifelong relationships, and not just for a moment. And I want to add that in terms of the narratives and who has control of the narrative. And I feel like there's an opportunity for us to really highlight that and amplify that through journalism and through storytelling. And some people do that, through writing. And, we have authors like Tamal Watts and Dr. Drew Lanham, who are fantastic writers, but they're also, biologists and conservationists, and, they're not monoliths. So really amplifying the storytelling and thinking about how we tell our stories are the best way that we know, without someone kind of watering it down for, their benefit, and showing that across generations, and amplifying that across generations.
That's great. Do you, Dara, Ade, do you have like, want to close us out with like 90 seconds each on that question?
Certainly. Actually, could you repeat the question so I'm concise?
Well, the question was really just what kind of message would you leave to the people in the audience who might be in science and want to think about how they can communicate an interest in all this to others?
Absolutely. So I think I'd opened up. The first thing I said was I started by watching Black Birders Week, and now I'm involved. And I remember watching, I think it was Nicole. I think I was just going off. I was angry, going off online. And Nicole friend requested me and stuff. But like that was the first reach out. And I eventually ended up meeting her later that summer. But my whole point was that is someone, I love this saying. It's related to fundraising, but it still applies. If they can't find you, they can't fund you. And this was a Tia Wells of Backyard Base Camp in Baltimore, Maryland. But it was related on like how being connecting with people and getting funding sources. But if you're not putting yourself out there, then how is anyone to know that you are interested in this, that you want connection, that you want community? And I myself, I'm not the best at this because I get big sad a lot. And I don't want to be online. I don't want to be out there like that. But that's the time where I really need to be out there the most. So that's what I'd leave with. This is definitely a week for celebrating us and definitely connecting with us. If you see someone online that you really vibe with, absolutely reach out to them, because more than likely than not, they are looking for community too.
Excellent. Okay, Ade.
Yeah, I think the last sort of follow-up to that is, once you put yourself out there, sort of how do you put yourself out there? Be yourself. Don't compromise whatever it is that makes you your interest in the thing, how you engage with whatever the topic is. There's a comment, I'm not going to go too far into this, but there's an interesting comment thread, because we get comment threads, every time Black Birders Week happens, and someone was very interested, I'll say it this way, in the sort of the language and the vernacular that we use. And like, well, just because we speak a certain way, first of all, not all of us do speak that way, but even when we do dip into that sort of slang terminology, it doesn't mean we don't know any less. Like, that's how we are, that's how we're showing up. And we can still communicate the facts. We know the facts, we know our stuff, we can communicate that to you the way we can. And if you pick it up, you pick it up. If you don't, all right. But we're not gonna put on a face just to appease the audience. Like, those who vibe with it, they vibe with it, they're better for it.
Love that note to end on. Thank you all for this really great conversation. Thank you to the audience. Encourage you to follow the hashtag Black Birders Week 2023. Check out the Uproot project, which co-hosted this event. But thank you everybody.
Thank you. And I just want to thank Maya, who's part of the Uproot project team, who helped us in the very beginning stages of creating this webinar. So if she is out there watching, thank you so much. We appreciate your help with that.
Thanks, Maya.